Welcome everybody to the Chippewa River Writing Project webinar series. This month we have the privilege of having Andy Shinneborn be our guest, and he's going to introduce himself here in a minute. My name is Jeremy Heiler. As I said, I am a teacher consultant for the Chippewa River Writing Project, and I am one of your co-hosts, and I'm going to turn it over to my other co-host, Becky.
Hi, everybody. My name is Becky Schwartz. I teach high school English at Springport Public Schools in Jackson County, Michigan. And I am one of your co-hosts for tonight's webinar. I'm going to turn it over really quickly to who we affectionately at the Chippewa River Writing Project call as the Poetry Master, Andy. He has a really exciting presentation on poetry. Andy has held a lot of leadership positions in the Michigan English world. He was a former past president of the Michigan Teachers of English, and he is the current vice president for Michigan Reading Association. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Andy. We are really excited to learn from you. Really looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Becky and Lori and Angela. I saw you pop in here. Good to see you. Yeah, so April is National Poetry Month. So we figured at the Writing Project, we'd dig into and to dive into some poetry. So I hope you have your notebooks handy. I hope you have your snaps warmed up and ready to go. And I hope that you're willing to go back a little bit to do some thinking, to do some writing, to do some sharing, and also kind of see how I organize my classroom so that we can not only incorporate poetry every single day, but spoken word poetry once a week. And we begin to lift out student voices into the classroom in something that I call Featured Poet Friday. And in some cases during Featured Poet Friday, I have students who are brave enough to actually recite and share their own work. And as we move ourselves through the school year, that bravery becomes less brave, I suppose, and more just excitement filled, because kids get excited to kind of hear and talk about and find out who that featured poet is going to be. But we'll talk about that kind of as we go here. There'll also be an opportunity for you too, if you love poetry and love t-shirts, to be able to purchase a t-shirt that turns into donations for a group in Oklahoma that houses incarcerated women, that uses poetry to help lift their voice. So mentioning that now so you can kind of hear about that a little bit later too. If you would like to have this slide deck, that's perfectly okay with me. There are links littered throughout the slide deck. You can use the Cutly link down there in the lower right-hand corner, or you can actually scan the QR code as well. That's for people who are viewing this remotely and people who are viewing live as well. I don't know if you have seen this picture before, but this is outside of Lansing. When I was at MRA, it was a mural put together by Destin Hunt, titled "Believe You Have a Voice," and something they call, his company is called Muralmatics, in which they take these murals and make large things. And so when I think about that poet that rests in wait within all of us, I think about the students that we have in our classrooms, the ones that we see perhaps here in this mural, and the ones who feel like school might not necessarily be them, and that for them, and that writing might not necessarily be for them. A lot of times the reasons why students say that, we can go into the weeds and talk about grades and things like that, and the impact that has on students' willingness to learn. But the other reason is, a lot of times students don't feel like they have anything to say. What they mean by that is they don't feel like they have anything of value to say. And this presentation will help kind of lift out that a little bit, turn that against that notion, and move our students into believing that not only do they have something to say, but they have a way to say it, and a way to say it that can make them proud about who they are and the way they think about themselves and the world. So to get us started, I'm going to be bringing in a special guest. This is Jason Reynolds. He's not really here. That would be awesome. But this is how I start every single year. In fact, if I have a new semester, a new trimester with new students, I usually start it during that time too, because I want students to be reflective about what it means to read and what it means to write. And this piece for everyone has us think about that, has us reflect on what it means to be a reader, what it means to be a writer, and what it means to not think that you are and still have that within you. So what I'm going to ask you to do here is just simply listen. We're just going to listen. We're just listening to part one. If I were to do this in the classroom, I usually kind of have this once a day for about, or I'm sorry, I do each part once a day. So we have about 4 days, like the first week, we get a different part of this, but we'll just listen to part one for today. This is for everyone. Okay, so let's kind of just honor those words with some snaps. I know it feels weird to maybe do at home or in the car or a sporting event, wherever you may be, but you know, I love to show this piece for students, not only because what Jason Reynolds has to say, but the reason why Jason Reynolds is so popular amongst teachers and amongst students and among everybody is because he's speaking truth. He's speaking to our hearts. He's speaking to our minds. He's speaking to what it means to be in an educational system all the way through 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, really and beyond. When he talks about being exhausted strugglers, I think that's who we are a lot of times, not only as teachers in a system that is obviously broken, but also as students who are in a system that is obviously broken. Because I'll have students who come into my classroom, and yes, I'm teaching alternative education students now, but this has happened for years anyways. This isn't anything new. It's not the group of kids that I have this year that makes them any different than the group of kids that I had in previous years. But our kids are tired too. And they don't really, most of them, I would say, don't really see themselves as readers. And most of them don't really see themselves as writers. And when I ask them about that, some will be blunt enough to say, I don't read. And so I'm blunt enough to say right back, I don't believe you. And then that turns into a strange kind of a conversation. I said, because I see you on Snapchat. I watch you looking things up on YouTube. I see you doing things that's reading. You're consuming media. That's what reading is. It's a consumption of media. And I see you doing that. So if we could drop that notion that you don't read, that's going to change some things for yourself, because you're already putting a barrier up for yourself when it comes to reading. And when you have that barrier up, it's easier to just dismiss it. Now, I will say this, and I'll say this to my students too. I'll say, look, I know what you mean when you say that you don't read. What you mean is you're not going to read the way school wants you to read. It's not engaging for you. It's not interesting for you. Maybe you don't have a choice in it. Maybe all the books and all the materials are things that you wouldn't pick for yourself. And that's okay. I get that. That's called being authentic. You know yourself. When it comes to writing, I have lots of students too that will say, I don't write, because all they ever do is write essays, right? And I'll say the same type of thing. I believe you that you're not a writer, but that's not true. You are. I don't write nothing. I said, what were you doing for the last 20 minutes with that girl on Snapchat? You weren't just reading her words, you were responding back with her. What were you doing with that other person? When you told me your mom texted you and it was a really important conversation, you're writing, you're formulating, you're thinking about what it is that you need to say to whoever the audience is, be it girlfriend or mom or dad or boss, and you're trying to figure out what it is that you want to say to them. That's writing. You are a writer. It's the same with reading. You kind of have this notion that you're not, because it's school writing that you don't identify with. But let's drop that too, because we can do different things in school that honors the stuff that you enjoy doing and still count it for the things that school wants it to be counted for. It doesn't have to be another version of read a book that you don't want to read and then write an essay that you don't want to write. It doesn't have to be that way. And maybe it's not that way for many people. That was my experience. I know that's been the experience of a lot of students share with me in their reflections as growing up as readers and writers in our education system. And so after we have that little bit of a talk, which is admittedly is kind of one-sided, but I want to kind of flush those ideas out, right? Because when it comes to literacy, I think what really matters is giving yourself that space and that time and being open-minded and just welcoming in the literacy that comes your way. Easier said than done. 100% I will agree with that. Easier said than done, because we have our own difficulties sometimes that we are working with. But what I'm going to ask you to do right now, I'm going to share a prompt with you that I share with my students. And Louis, nice to see you. And so when you see this prompt, we're going to write here for just about 5 minutes. Now, I don't care what kind of medium you're writing on. Maybe you have a writer's notebook, like I know Angela has. She showed us a little bit. Maybe you don't have a writer's notebook. Maybe you forgot. Maybe you're on a computer, so you probably have access to some kind of Google document. That's fine too. And a lot of times my students will try to be clever and say, well, I don't have access to that kind of stuff. And I say, but you got your phone and you got the Notes app on your phone. So I know that you can have access to something. And please don't let that come to you, across to you as being me speaking down to you. I just know sometimes students have ways of trying to get around doing anything that they don't want to do. So if we can minimize that, that helps pretty well. So find whatever medium that you want to work with. And we're going to write to this prompt here. I'm going to share my screen. It might play here really quick, but I'm going to try. So here, leaning right into this idea of Jason Reynolds For Everyone, he talks about Dear Dreamer, and that's how he starts it. We're going to take about 5 minutes. And I just want you to write, Dear Dreamer, the truth is, and write your truth about why you write. Okay, no one has to see this. We don't have to share. We could share, but do talk about the reasons why you write. We all do in some way, shape, or form. And then in the end, have a sign off that says with love, and I would like you to use that 4-letter word and put me or put your name. So you're kind of writing to yourself. You in this case are your first audience, and you in this case are the dreamer. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up here. If there's any comments, questions, or concerns, just add it into the chat, and I'll have Becky text me or something, and then we can get something going for you. But I think you're good to go. So why don't we take just a little bit of time here, and we'll do some writing. Welcome back, writers. Please find a spot in your writing where you can stop comfortably, wherever that may be at. And just like for us as teachers, that's how I welcome my students back too when they get done writing. Sometimes there's a lot of nudging that happens during our writing process, but by mentioning that they are writers and by welcoming them back as writers or as readers, they begin to identify that way a little bit easier and become comfortable being called that and thinking about themselves that way. So I'm going to try something. I don't know if someone is willing to share. Maybe we could. I have something that I could share with folks what I've written. But I'm going to try the most deadliest game imaginable. This is a game of asking anybody in a large group to say who might be willing to share. And if you are not so brave, that's okay too.
I will. Well, I'm gonna put on the front. Okay.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Louis.
I don't have a front. I don't have.
No problem.
Well,
Would that be okay if I Okay, wonderful. So this is what Louis has written. Dear Dreamer, the truth is that when I write for me, just for me, I allow myself to connect to all of the secret hidden places deep inside. It's my way of letting my voice out. It's a form of freedom. Thinking about those places reminds me of a story when the spider wiggled and jiggled and giggled inside her. While her spider may not have actually giggled, there seems to be this profundity in allowing myself full expression. It is an outlet for my emotions, a way of discovery, and a trail to follow along the deep woods. And that is why I write. That's awesome, dude. And thank you so much for allowing me to read your words. I appreciate you. And very cool. Anybody else brave enough to lift out something that they may have written? All right, giving some, unless you're going to go, Angela. You ready?
I'll do a little bit. Sure.
All right, cool.
Dear Dreamer, I felt tears at simply the notion of the truth is. So I have my sign. It's time to be still and quiet so I can feel. The days are picking up speed and the chaos will only accelerate in the coming weeks. Then, the summer slowdown.
That's for Angela too. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all feeling that right now. I share with my students too because I want them to know like why I write, right? Like, you know, I'm an English teacher. I do some writing, and some of it's okay, and some of it's not very good, and that's usually how I feel about it for myself. Other people may not feel that way, but I'm not. I don't always. I feel kind of sometimes still uncomfortable, even though I've been published and all this kind of stuff, right? So I think it's important to kind of let that truth leak out there too. But this is what I wrote. I wrote, "Dear dreamer, the truth is my life hasn't been one that many would look upon with envy. I struggle with depression and have found comfort in books and with words. But the words haven't always come out just right. They're crooked or mumbled or misunderstood. And yet without words and the meaning they hold for me, I'm not sure where I would be. You see, my father is a storyteller, an agile self-deprecationist who always wants to spin a yarn but never wants to write the words. Growing up, he was told his spelling and grammar was awful. And because he saw what they saw, he believed it. When it comes to words, teachers do things to students that sometimes cannot be undone. And sometimes a voice he heard telling him his writing was not good, that it needed work and was wrong, translated into a voice he carried with him. Sometimes that voice sneers at the words a writer puts on the page and manifests into a near tangible troll. Sometimes that voice travels to the next generation as it chomps on its dime store cigar, dropping ashes into the mind of the next writer with a tap of its knotted finger. The truth is, I am pushing against this judge whenever I sit down to write. But I was lucky. I had a teacher who taught me that writing began with words. Writing began with what was already inside of us. Writing began with tapping into the heart of a voice competing for space against the troll. She said, writing is play. Play with your words. Listen to what they have to say and don't be afraid to follow where they lead. Little did I know this simple statement would one day save my life. I'll say it again. Writing saved my life. This is not metaphor. This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. This is real. Writing is that powerful. My words were captured in a journal when I was a teenager that I wrapped in duct tape. It was a private space where I could say what I wanted, when I wanted, how I wanted, and nobody could tell me no. I owe writing more than I could ever repay, and that is why I write. With love, Andy. I share that with kids too, because I don't want them to think like I used to think, thank you, Lori, that, boy, these teachers just got to figure it out and writers either have it or you don't have it. And that's just the way it's going to be because, when I tell students that they're already writers, that resonates with them a lot because, we think about those things that maybe take too long. Sometimes we have to get figured out. We write together. And so that kind of helps us not only with poetry, but it also helps us when we're thinking about those spaces and why we give time to those spaces. Oops, I forgot to share my screen. Do that real quick. So this begs a good question, and we're not going to spend time to think about this, but there was a session for CRWP that we're all a part of, and Travis Crowder was in it. I think it was a teacher demo. And the question that he asked was, where does writing come from? It's such a simple question, but it produces really profound results when you stop to think about, where does my writing come from? Where does any writing come from? And when we respond to that question, it can come in surprising ways. So I'm going to share with you what Felicia Rose Chavez talks about, where writing comes from for her. And Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, she writes, writing is a relationship with the self, after all. It's that ritual of tuning in and listening to the language inside of us. Listening to the language inside of us. As a writing teacher, I often say to my students, well, one of the first things you need to have is you need to consider your audience, right? Well, what is that audience? It could be lots of things. That's a hard question to answer. But who is your first audience? Your first audience is you. You are the one who needs to invest your time into your writing first. That's something that I believe. It's like reading a book. If it's something that you don't want to pick up, you're going to have a hard time getting through with it. If it's not something you don't want to write, you're going to have a hard time writing it. If you're only doing writing tasks because they're given to you, that makes it a challenge. If you're doing writing tasks because you want to do them, that changes the game when it comes to writing and how you see yourself as a writer. And so I really appreciate what Felicia Rose Chavez talks about when she says that we have to think about tuning in and listening to the language inside of us. Because too often, and maybe this is just my students, probably not, but too often trying to figure out what's inside of the head of the teacher and what do they want and how can I get an A out of it. So when I proposed this to my students, I had a student who was in 10th grade a couple years ago, and she wrote this beautiful poem titled Why I Write. And I'm going to share this with you really quickly because I think from a student's perspective, does every student write this way? Not necessarily, but this is a way that Isabel feels connected to writing. And she says, in the absence of words, I write. When I'm too hesitant to share my story aloud, I write. When I can't even bring myself to speak, for nothing I could share could capture how I truly feel, I write. I write for myself. To try to make sense of what I'm feeling on the inside, to bring thoughts to life on a piece of paper, and to finally see it come together like it was meant to be. Freeing myself from the concealment, finishing that sentence and letting go. That feeling of release when you've given of yourself what was needed. And even if you didn't, you're content with that. Because there will always be a void to fill and a reason to write again. I'm in the habit of giving snaps to words, even though our students can't hear that. But when I saw that Isabel had written that, I had said to her, oh my God, do you know what you have here? You have something brilliant that people have been trying to say for a long time. And, she said, really? And I said, you do. And then I kind of talked to her about why I think it was so wonderful what she had to say. And I think it's pretty universal. Are we all feeling the same way that she feels about writing? Probably not. But there are a lot of universal truths that are happening within that piece too. And if a 10th grader is thinking about that, I'm sure if we give students space, if we give them time, if we write along with them, if we share our own personal vulnerabilities with students, they begin to come around, see themselves as writer, trust the situation, trust the environment, trust the teacher, trust themselves, and then they begin to trust their writing. And that's how we start to see things like Isabel produced. Now, I don't have things like that all the time come from my students, but I do have things like that come from my students. And sometimes even way more interesting things come from my students. But I like that for this particular presentation, because I think it fits pretty well with what we're talking about. And this is that sense of writing and writing poetry to bring out that writer from within. I mean, it kind of begs this question, right? Like, there's so many other things we can read, so many other things we can write. Like, why poetry? Why poems? Some people don't like poetry, and that's okay. Some people don't want to write poetry. Some people's experiences with poetry has only been that one unit where you write a bunch of different poems and then you kind of go for it. And or some other experiences have been like Billy Collins talks about, where we tie that poem to a tree and all we do is dissect the thing until it's way beyond dead, and our love for words are dead as well. But poetry actually encompasses a lot of things. In the digital realm, multimodal text is something that gets talked about an awful lot, but I think poems are multimodal text. I don't even think it's a question. And to kind of demonstrate why I say that, I'll share from writer-designer Cheryl Ball's, Jennifer Shepard, and then Kristen Arola's ideas that kind of show what multimodality really is, multimodality. There's a linguistic mode. So this is the written or the spoken words. I'm not going to read all this to you, but that's poetry. Poetry has written and or spoken words. So we have the linguistic mode covered. The visual mode, the images, the characters that people see. Now, when you listen to poetry, you're not going to get the visual mode. But when you take a look at the rhetorical moves and the structure of a poem, the play that happens within a poem, we certainly get a visual mode too. Sometimes it can be as simple as actually putting words into the shape of an animal that you're describing in poetry. And in other cases, it can be just playing with the enjambments, playing with the spacing between the letters. You're creating this visual mode as well. The oral mode is focused on the sound, including and not limited to music, sound effects, and ambient noise, even silence. So when we're talking about the oral mode, if you are listening or speaking the words, sometimes it's what you say and the alliteration that happens within the poem too. But some of the most powerful moments are those moments of silence where you let the words hang in the air just a little bit longer. That's part of the oral mode as well. And then there's the spatial mode. This is that physical arrangement, organization, and proximity to the texts kind of when you're thinking about how are the words visually on the page, but then how are they spaced out on the page? It can follow structure, but it doesn't have to necessarily find a structure, and then we can find the spatial mode there. And the gestural mode, you kind of see me doing this. This is the movement of the way that it's interpreted. So we see this often with spoken word poetry, body language, the interactions, the way that people reach in, even the snaps, all of this is part of the gestural mode. So looking at this, like, I mean, some people say, why poems? And I say, why not poems? Because in short but powerful pieces, we can encompass everything that we see in multimodal texts. We can talk about that with our students as well, but I think it helps to break us out of this idea of poetry as just something that we do in a one particular unit. I think we can do poetry every single day, and I do have poems we read every single day. We don't do much with it, we just appreciate the words. But how are we meeting standards and benchmarks? How are we meeting Common Core? Right here. These are these multimodal texts of poetry that allows us to do all these different types of things. And so what I'm going to have you have us do right this second is I'm going to have you listen to this poem, Elementary, by G. Yamazawa. And I'm going to ask you to kind of pinpoint what are some things that you notice and what are some things that are worthy of note after you hear this that kind of help us see that poetry really truly is a multimodal text. Before I get there, I'm going to ask real quick, comments, questions, concerns for me, because sometimes when I just have the screen up there and I'm moving along, I just move too fast. Okay, speak them up or put them in the chat, and that's okay too. Okay, sure. Should I put it back up?
Well, just now.
Did I write the poem? The
I
one.
think Lewis means the poem at the beginning that you read, the one with the Dear Dreamer, because he asked the question earlier. Did you write that poem just now in that short time we had?
I did. Yeah. So.
Oh.
Well, yeah. How did I do that? We'll talk about that too, because one of the things that we're going to be doing is I actually wrote it as prose first. So I just wrote it as a paragraph, and then what I'll do sometimes is within that paragraph, and we're going to try it today. Try doing tumble down poetry, where we can take students who don't see themselves as poets and just have them write just in prose or in paragraphs, and then we can look for different things and we can find poems within the words that we have there. So, and I guess I would say too that in that particular piece, I'm pretty comfortable and used to kind of just reading things sort of and putting pauses where I see them happening, like enjambments. But yeah, that's how I was able to do that. So it was quite a bit, but remember, it was also written out like in paragraph form too. Okay. So yeah. Well, thank you. So as we listen to this next piece, Elementary, we're not necessarily doing too much with it, but I just want you to think about what are some of the modes that you're noticing within this. Now, there are going to be some modes missing because obviously we're not going to be able to see the words on the page. So we're just going to be hearing them. So seeing some of the spatial modes is not something we're going to be able to see. But we'll take a listen to G. Yamazawa's Elementary. Snaps for G. Yamazawa also. Just kind of go around here really quick. I guess, I don't know, Lori, if you could turn your mic on. What's one of those multimodal ideas that you could hear within that piece, if you can remember them?
The language was what blew me away. Just, wow.
Thank you so much. Angela, what's another mode perhaps that you might have discovered within that piece, if you can remember them?
I'm losing the vocabulary there, but just the concepts. Which one would pull at your heart so distinctly ups and downs. Why would I lift my voice just to put someone down? I mean, there were a number of lines I was trying to scratch out here. Maybe the oral mode, the tone of his voice, you know, he really, it was subtle, but it was there to bring it up or bring it down. So I felt like I was on the roller coaster with them.
Absolutely. So Laura talked kind of about the linguistic mode. The gestural mode happens there quite a bit too. It's harder for us to see the visual and the spatial modes of writing here, mainly because we don't get to see the piece.
I'm not the visual. I'm not the visual. The option that we are wanting to touch the measurement of that really city the issue
Yeah, absolutely. That the language and the visuals that he's creating with that, and then juxtaposed with that whole notion of his father, I think, saying, you know, what does that even mean to call someone gay and to make fun of them for that? Like, what does that even mean? This is a person. This is a human being, right? You know.
on the front line too.
Yes, the fault lines that are within our own personal faults. Yeah, beautiful. Press the wrong button. Go back here and here we go. So, you know, this is interesting. So writing, really, when we think about it, and writing poetry, it's not big magic, like Elizabeth Gilbert talks about. You know, the central question, which all creative living hinges, is: do we have the courage, as teachers and as writers and as students, do we have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are already hidden within us? Because they're already there. It's just given the opportunity for us to find them. And this will give us an opportunity to try this out just a little bit. We're going to take just 3 minutes this time, and you can see already that I've did some writing here first, but I want you to be able to see this. Tumble down poetry is some of that big magic, I think, that happens when students see their words transformed in this prose narrative, rough paragraph, and then turned into poetry. And so we're going to try this out. And you can begin with any prompt. It really doesn't matter. Tumble down poetry works pretty well because you're not trying to write a poem. That's what you're not trying to do. You're just writing. Today, though, we're going to write about shoes. So just think about that notion of shoes. We're going to take about 3 minutes, and I just want you to write just a thought shot, writing burst, quick write, if you will, about a pair of shoes that you had that you'll never forget. Just write in paragraph form about a pair of shoes that you had that you'll never forget. And maybe you don't like shoes and you don't care about shoes, and talk about that. That'll work too. 3 minutes to write. No, that's a super short amount of time. Maybe take another 15, 20 seconds and kind of finish up with whatever you have. And it's not going to be a completed paragraph, so don't worry about that. It's okay. Okay. So find a spot to stop wherever you happen to be. You might have had just a tiny little bit. That's all right, because we're just kind of getting a feel for what this tumble down poetry might look like and what it might feel like, and how it can help students to see themselves as poets. So I've kind of done this ahead of time, but you can see this. I'm not going to read this to you, but this was the paragraph that I wrote. Now, we take it, once your paragraph is written, what I'm going to ask you to do is look for these naturally occurring repetitions within there. Where is the alliteration already taking place? What are some striking images that you're noticing? Where are moments of emphasis that seem to fit where enjambments may occur? And we talk about what all these different devices are. And then just play with the structure and form as the poem tumbles down the page. I'm going to go back and forth with this because I want you to see this. This is actually kind of neat. So this was my paragraph. This is my poem. Word for word, they are the same. Absolutely the same. But what makes this prose turn into this poem is the enjambment. It's the spacing. It's the taking time to figure out and play with how, in this case, I want my words shared. So I'm going to read this out loud so you can kind of hear how that might look. I bought my first pair of Vans when I was 17. They were white-toed and gray with a fresh white wave of leather accenting the sides. Though I was no skater, I had hair long enough for girls to run their fingers through and shoes that were ready-made canvas for expression. In my room, at friends' homes, on the street, in the park, and even during school assemblies, I would draw, write, and create designs to make these Vans uniquely mine. Checkering the toe like a chessboard, help to pass the time, writing resist next to a clenched fist, and the heel created conversation. So did the heart shape I colored red. Lettering the sides with the names of Nirvana, RATM, and Dre. Quoting Kerouac, I thought one day I will find the right words and they will be simple. When I was 17, I wore my identity on my shoes. My first pair of Vans transformed me as much as they transported me into the unknown of adulthood, where the future was as elusive as my dreams. Now, I could have sort of read that from here, but when we play with the space and we think about those multimodalities that are occurring within this writing, it takes on a whole new aura about itself by writing it in a poem form. Now, how did the structure come like this? Well, I was looking for patterns. I saw a lot of active verbs, checkering, writing, lettering, quoting. And I thought, well, there were some patterns in there. So how could I lift those patterns out? How could I lift that repetition out and cause the enjambment so I didn't have just these long lines of sentences? Students really find when they do this that they're really surprised that they had a poem hidden within their words and within in their paragraphs anyway. I happen to use all the words in mind, but sometimes what happens too is it gets your students looking a little closer at their writing, so then they can make decisions as an author about what they're choosing to include and what they're choosing not to include. And sometimes it jumpstarts writing as well. I am being cognizant of my time, so I wanted us to have that as something for us to do. And I think we can probably stop here. There's more for me to share with you as well, but Patrice Fachon in her work, My Shouting, Shuttered, Whispering Voice, says, writing poems is a way to uncover what most needs to be uncovered. It's to loosen the tongue in solitude, to make connections that can't be made in conversation. Poems are made of questions way more than they are made of answers. And there's a lot more to the slideshow and the slide deck, and I think that Jeremy and Becky have put it in the chat. If you'd like to have it there, you can grab it there. So there's lots of other things to look at, including poets who I think resonate with students, and different ways that you can find poetry groups as a teacher poet, as a teacher writer, that you can find poetry groups that help bring prompts into your classroom for your students, and places where you can help get students' words sort of out there in larger, more authentic spaces. Because writing for yourself is one thing, and it's an important step, but then helping students to get those words out, even just to each other, even out for a teacher, even then maybe out to a secretary, and then maybe out to a principal. And then we take that next scary step in getting it out and beyond the classroom walls. When students begin to hear that people appreciate their words and people have value in their words, our students are also hearing that people appreciate them and see value within them. That is worth way more than any grade could possibly could possibly come up with. You can't find a point number high enough of a grade to be able to give that confidence for a student. They begin to see themselves as poets, and they begin to see themselves really more importantly as writers, and they begin to see themselves as people who are able to do hard things and scary things and move themselves outside of the box just a little bit. I've had students in my alternative school this year walk into my classroom on the first day saying, I hate reading and I hate writing, and if you try to make me do either, I'll hate you too, end quote. And now they're running around the school, can't wait to show me, the principal, secretary, each other, the words that they have created. And most of those words have no grades attached to them. It's just because they see themselves now as people who enjoy these types of things, you know, and I don't think I could have come up with the right essay to ever get people to like writing like that. And poetry is a way to help us do that. So we have a few minutes here. Quick to say thank you so much for your time and for listening. And I'm available for some questions and comments if you have any.
Andy, I
am
just want
refreshed. Yeah.
go ahead.
Ready
Andy.
for these last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, and Andy, I just want to say that, you know, back when I was in third grade poetry, I was in a poetry club. I can remember my third grade teacher. I'm still friends with her on Facebook and connect with her. And every time that I listen to you talk about poetry and the ways you introduce poetry, just it makes me fall in love with it all over again, like I was when I was a third grader and a fourth grader. So thank you so much for all of this. And if I was still in the classroom, I know I would be doing some of these activities that you've done. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise in this area.
You're welcome. I owe poetry an awful lot. So, you know, just kind of saying, but I also think that people have a tendency, and we do this with genres of different types of writing. People have a tendency to put poetry up on a pedestal and where it can seem untouchable. It's not. They're just words. I mean, I think that's what Hamlet said, right? There's words, right? So let's just get those words out there. There's nothing, and this is me, you know, saying this about my own writing, which feels weird, which is why I'm kind of stuttering a little bit. But there's nothing truly special about the words that I've written. It's just that they're written, you know, it's they're written. And I've had a chance to kind of think about it creatively. And when you do that, all of that moves itself into how we respond to each other. It moves itself into those essays that we have to do, and it brings more of a personality and flair perhaps into it. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. And you know, I think with those words, I think this is a great place for us to stop tonight, because there's no better way to say it than how Andy has said it right there. We have a couple other awesome opportunities coming up for you. I don't know if Andy or Becky can pop those links in the chat for us in terms of some Chippewa River Writing Project offerings. We want to encourage you too. We have one more webinar coming up in May where we're going to be discussing, I'm not going to be discussing, one of our other teacher leaders is going to be discussing syllabus equity and creating diverse reading lists. And so if you care to join us on May 17th for that, that would be fantastic. That is the last of our webinar series for the school year. And Andy has popped in some links for us in terms of his slideshow and also the upcoming CRWP events. So please check out all of that stuff, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions for us. And we're so thankful that Andy could present tonight with his busy schedule, and that all of you with your busy schedules could come and join us. It's phenomenal. And I think Angie said it best. Every time I come into a CRWP space, it's rejuvenating. Like you just get that extra pump and that extra juice, and you're ready to go back at it again. So I really want to say thank you to Andy, and thank you to all of you for being a part of that. So I hope all of you have a wonderful evening, and good luck the rest of the school year if we don't see you before that. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.